everybody, and welcome to the Voices of Delphi podcast. My name is Makayla Davis.
And my name is Sarah France, and we are two women joined together by a mutual love for all things mystical, magical, and metaphysical. This podcast is dedicated to conversations on bridging the esoteric with the mundane, reintegrating ancient wisdom into the modern day, and inspiring listeners worldwide to reawaken the oracle within. Hi, Makayla. Happy to be here with you.
I'm so excited we're finally doing this.
I know, long time in the making. I feel like it's been years since we did an episode together for your YouTube channel. Do you remember that? The Mars video?
Yes, I do.
Yep.
Maybe like later we should pull up our pictures because we look so different in
I
those.
know. I know. For those of you who don't know me, I was very blonde.
Yeah.
Did you have a different hair color at the time? I can't remember.
Yeah, it was like more natural.
Yeah. Heard that. Heard that. Perfect, perfect.
Yep.
Well, here we are, like almost 3, 4 years later, and bringing this podcast to you guys. Super exciting stuff. So let's go ahead and just jump right in. But as always, guys, if you enjoy this podcast and you like this episode, please don't forget to like, comment, or subscribe, as that, of course, just helps things running and bringing this content that you love back to your For You page.
So we collaborated on this name, which I was very proud of us coming up with this together over a little Zoom powwow session for the Voices of Delphi because we wanted to not put ourselves under an umbrella first off with this podcast. It's
Mhm.
very important that we not only can include esoteric knowledge and astrology, which are passions of both Sarah and I, but also things like yoga, because Sarah's a big yogi, and human design, and what it means to be a woman and all things spirituality. And we really hope to evolve on this podcast as time goes on with,
Mhm.
other guests that can come in because we're not knowledgeable in everything. So we can have other guests come in and even, bring more enlightenment here. But a part of our process with this is having a voice for feminine energy. And one of the rich legacies, I guess I would say, of Delphi is that it was this famous oracle. Well, there would be several of them over thousands of years, and they were actually called Pythias, which were these selected women that would come in and they would actually channel inside of this chamber and give riddles and wisdom for people seeking knowledge around, even kings and leaders and knights and everything would come to see the Pythia in this oracle chamber of Delphi and gain this wisdom. And she was considered to be channeling this knowledge from the god Apollo himself. And
Mhm.
so we kind of wanted to carry on this legacy of oracle telling and channeling and embodying the feminine mystique and sharing wisdom in a very modern sense to, give voice to all of these important things I think that are healing around the feminine archetype. And, not even just feminine, I'm sure we'll bring in the masculine as
Of course,
well
got
in
to.
in
Yeah.
in episodes, right? But this is really about reawakening that kind of experience in a very mystical sense, but also for modern day listeners because we live in this very modern day world.
Exactly. I think that was perfectly, perfectly said. I loved every single word of that. And like you mentioned, the Pythias, they oftentimes would give messages, right? Or they would channel these, predictions or interpretations of situations that oftentimes were described as something like a riddle. It was oftentimes a very kind of elusive and poetic and sometimes confusing expression that she would utter. And so, because of that, Michaela and I thought that it would be a nice little tradition to start every episode with a riddle of our creation. The two of us came up with this through much trial and tribulation.
It hurt our brain. We'll get better.
So, with that being said, our riddle for you today is this. I am one of nine. Of love and tragedy, I am divine. Chase me down, and I will run. Surrender control, and I will come. Who am I? Well, Michaela, do you want to answer the question? Who am I?
We're gonna let that sit with everybody. But what we are going to do today is invite a conversation in for all of our listeners on the seven feminine archetypes, which might help you answer that riddle for your own personal life. And this was an important topic, I think, for the both of us because it embodies so much of what we do with astrology. And you specialize in Hellenistic and traditional, which is a major theme with mythology itself.
Mhm.
And through my evolutionary astrology lens, we heavily focus on the archetypes as well. And there's a real beauty in understanding the myth and the archetype of a feminine embodiment and how that can show up in our day-to-day life. So I think that's why, Sarah and I really wanted to come on this episode to educate, inform, and kind of sprinkle in some information into the minds of all of our listeners of what that means.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would just piggyback off of that and say, especially when it comes to the seven feminine archetypes that we're going to be expanding upon today, and a number of the different asteroids that we see astrologically in some more minor bodies, well, considered minor, but in reality, they oftentimes come up in very obvious and powerful and tangible ways. But I think that it's so important to give them the time and attention that they deserve because, at least astrologically speaking, out of the 10 planets that we're working with, right, the 8 planets and the sun and the moon as luminaries, we really only have two of those 10 archetypes that are inherently deemed as feminine, right?
Yes.
The moon and Venus. And especially when it comes to understanding the chart of, any woman or even the chart of a man, right? Understanding the women in his life and how he responds to them and relates to them. Looking at those feminine archetypes and those feminine asteroids are so, so valuable.
Amen. And
Mic
it
drop.
and it is too because and I'm so glad you brought that up because not that I want to get deep into the patriarchal embodiment here, right? In that conversation, open that up, but maybe I'll
Right.
open it up a little bit. But now that women are coming more into power and they're having more voice, we're having more authority in the world, different relationship dynamics when, we're not just the home caregivers anymore. A lot of us are professionals, we have our own businesses and so forth. It is important to bring this into the forefront and to make this, I think, a part of anybody's astrological practice.
Absolutely.
Bring that out, to empower that, and to give it a voice and a name and, space, really taking up space in
Hmm.
society.
The space that they deserve, absolutely. And it's really incredible. I mean, not to get too far off of our topic for today, but in client work, discussing the asteroids for the first time with a woman in session, right, is oftentimes, extremely illuminating for them, right? Especially if they have one of these feminine archetypes like Athena or like Lilith or, any one of these asteroids on the ascendant, on the sun, on the moon. It's a whole element and piece to their persona and their life experience and their drive and psyche that is oftentimes completely overlooked because we spend so much time talking about the other planetary archetypes, which, like I said earlier, are primarily focused on, at least mythologically, very masculine figures, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think it's just a really beautiful conversation to be having. I'm really excited for it. I know it's something that listeners worldwide are really craving.
Yeah.
I think Makayla and I both would agree on the fact that, in large part, one of our main goals with this podcast is to really, like you said, give the attention that these archetypes deserve in a cohesive way, right?
Yeah.
Not just cherry picked one off episodes, but actually go through them sequentially and really, really dive deep.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
All right. So, would you like to go into defining some of these archetypes and introducing them?
Yeah. Yeah. So
Cool.
I guess we could start with the maiden, which was first on our list.
Yeah, perfect.
And yeah, and so the maiden tends to be this archetype or this behavioral pattern that we may embody at times. And I definitely can relate to this in my younger years, where it's more of like a youthful and naive kind of archetype, right? The maiden tends to be somebody who loves love and embodies love and can fall in love very easily. And
Hmm.
it's not naive in a sense that it's like a negative quality, essentially. It's more of like a lack of experience.
Yeah.
And, we've all been there where we've fallen in love with the wrong person or relationship with the wrong person, or maybe they weren't the wrong person, they were the right person to teach us something. But there is this initiation at one point that the maiden archetype will go into, learning a lesson because of
Hmm.
her fresh energy, right? Her freshness to life. And then she becomes more, because of the struggle, she becomes more embodied and more empowered. And
Yeah.
one of the asteroids that we relate this to in the astrology side is Persephone, which is one
Hmm.
of my favorite asteroids to work with personally. And, she quickly, her storyline is she is the daughter of Demeter or Ceres, whatever name, Greco-Roman, whatever name you want to correlate it to, but she is the daughter, and Hades, the god of the underworld, she catches his eye. And it's because she's fresh and she's young and she's youthful and she's beautiful and she's very pretty, and he has an eye for her. So he actually abducts her into the underworld to make her the queen of the underworld. And her mother is heartbroken, which we'll get into the storyline of that when we get there. But her mother is heartbroken. And so there's this negotiation that happens wherein Persephone gets to come back up from the underworld for, half of the year, two-thirds of the year, and be with her mother. And then she goes back down to the underworld. But there's this storyline behind this archetype of this innocence being taken from you,
Hmm.
and there's also an empowerment journey behind it. And I love to look at Persephone in the lens that she becomes the queen
Hmm.
after she goes through this struggle and this reckoning, right? And so it is this on a lower scale. I think sometimes it can lead to this like victim mentality. But
Hmm.
if we reverse the psychology here and we really embody this adaptability that Persephone and the maiden can have, then, it's just this young, fresh lover girl energy that actually turns it around and becomes the queen and really powerful
Hmm.
after that loss of innocence, right? That's just a part of life. Like, there's going to be times when that happens to us where we have this abduction kind of feeling, and it doesn't just mean physical. It could be an abduction of your mind, right? Where you maybe lose your innocence of how you saw religion, right? This overall arch of religion and how it made you feel safe and secure for so long. And maybe you have this moment in life where you have this abduction and you see like the dark side or the different side of it, and then you come out with a different knowledge afterwards with more wisdom, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And, from an esoteric perspective, when it comes to the maiden, I oftentimes think of the high priestess and the tarot
Mm,
and that image of her where, she's sitting on this throne and she's really like the guard of a threshold, right? And behind her is this tapestry that's covered in pomegranates, which is the fruit of the underworld, right? Which
ah,
Persephone, basically, the story goes that she wasn't fully bound to her fate of remaining in the underworld until she ate from the pomegranates. I believe it's like she ate six seeds or something like that. And that's what sealed her connection to the underworld. So pomegranates are have been used as a symbol of the underworld and of the occult for quite some time.
yeah,
And, I think of this high priestess as, she's a spiritual threshold, right?
yeah,
And in that same way, that journey of the maiden as well is a spiritual threshold, right?
yeah,
And it also makes me think from a psychological perspective, of some of this work that Carl Jung did, where he expanded upon this idea of the empath and the narcissist, right?
yeah,
And how, for example, many empaths will be drawn to people who are narcissistic and go kind of through this psychological gauntlet, right? Where they're broken down, they have to face their shadow, they meet kind of their rock bottom psychologically and emotionally, and have to rebuild themselves, right? And oftentimes, it results in a strength of character and a strength of will, and also a strength of discernment. And I think that that discernment is one of the things that the maiden really learns, is right, being able to discern the intentions of other people, discern the validity of certain relationships, and discern whether or not somebody is actually worthy of you.
Yes.
Um, so, and to what capacity. So, absolutely, I think I feel like as women, we've all been through the
Yeah.
maiden. I don't know.
Yeah. I'm like, are you
I don't
talking
know
about my
anybody.
history? Like,
I know. We've all dated a Dusty. I don't know who
I'm
has
like,
it.
don't tell me about narcissism. Like,
I know. That's
gotta
just, we can make a whole other episode about that.
so many
But
ladies are got a degree in narcissistic abuse. Yeah.
yep, for
Mhm.
real.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like the maiden is really that it's a very complex, out of all of the archetypes, I find that she's one of the most complex.
Yeah.
But I really do love her transformation. You know, she is very much the phoenix rising, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yep. And
All
I
right.
love that you brought in the narcissism thing, right? Because that really
Mhm.
grounds it for humans. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I mean, if you even go back in the mythology before we had those, terms, right, to define it, like
Yeah.
Hades or Pluto, much of his behavior could have been deemed as narcissistic, right? And
Yeah.
even astrologically, when we're looking at situations like that in a birth chart, right? Oftentimes Pluto will be in there, thrown in the
Yes.
mix in some way.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The power dynamic. Hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. So moving on to the mother, Demeter or Ceres. And, what's interesting to me that always stands out about the story of Demeter and Ceres, particularly in connection with, the abduction of Persephone, is that Demeter or Ceres, she was basically a fertility goddess, and she was responsible for the fertility and bounty of crops, right? She was an agricultural goddess as well, oftentimes referred to as a goddess of wheat, right? Her symbol astrologically is the sickle, the tool that's used to cut wheat. And it has always, stood out to me about her archetype that one of the power plays that she kind of makes to get her daughter back is she wreaks famine upon the earth. She
Yeah.
kills off all the crops, right? To the point where the gods basically say, okay, oh shit, we got to step in. We got to do something about this because the human race is going to die. And I always think of this idea of, a mother's rage, right?
Yeah.
And how, like, it's really incredible to see how women are able to transform into these, just forces to be reckoned with when it's their baby in a way,
Yeah.
or in the way. We all know, like, you see a cub in the wild, don't go near it, right? Walk away. And I always think of, that because I think we focus a lot on the conversation of the mother as, the nurturer, the caretaker, right? But she's also the protectress. Do you know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's already like making me think of how I love to protect my dogs.
Mm.
Right. And it's just it's like,
Yeah.
hold on, okay? Like we don't mess with the puppies, right? And I can only
Hmm.
imagine if I had children. And
Right.
here's like something you touched on series in the birth chart. Here's something not everyone has had great relationships with their mother archetype.
Hmm. Right.
So, if it's activated in your chart or if you're going through this process of embodying this archetype at whatever point in your journey here, you do get in touch with this emotional sensitive side. And one of the things about this archetype is because there's such a strong desire to nurture and to care for something, whether you had that upbringing and that care or not, right? If you didn't, you probably want to overcare, right? If you did have a
Hmm.
smothering upbringing, maybe you're balanced out or maybe a little bit less because it was smothering. But at some points, I think it can be hard for this archetype to express their feelings because they feel
Yes.
so much responsibility.
Yes.
And so they
Absolutely.
would rather like have that control to have that like responsibility and like just be that overall caretaker
Hmm.
rather than letting the emotions go and letting the emotions flow. And
Yeah.
I think it's very important to keep in mind if this archetype showing up for you is to, it's okay and it's safe to express your emotions, and you can still be that responsible nurturer, caretaker. You can still protect, even if you are having to show some emotion or have some emotion come up.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, being a mother sometimes is, it's a thankless job in the sense that there is so much that mothers do, when they're taking their job seriously and their role seriously to contain that which is inside of them so
Yes.
that it doesn't leak out onto others, right?
Yep.
And I always think about,
Yep.
for example, with the sign of Cancer existing on the Cancer Capricorn axis. And people oftentimes overlook that kind of strength and solidity of that axis. We really hyper associate that with Capricorn and that Saturnian way. But Cancer, the mother, is the consort to Capricorn. You know what I mean? They're inextricable from one another.
Yep.
And that rigidity of keeping everything within in order to hold it all together, to be the glue, so to speak, as I feel like what moms, oftentimes that's the role that they fill. And the mother archetype in particular, I think that they run the risk, like you said, of trying to fill that role in every aspect of their life, sometimes to the point of martyrdom, right?
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So we're seeing you, you moms, and
Yeah,
this is
absolutely. If you're a mom out there, we love you. We
we
see
love
you.
you. It's post Mother's Day, also,
Yes,
ironically.
that's right. Happy Mother's Day. Happy belated Mother's Day to all the moms. I think by the time this goes out, it's going to be like a week from now, but still,
Yeah.
Mo- the month of May is for moms.
Yeah, I love that. So
Cool.
that brings us next to the Queen,
Mm.
and also known as Hera, and I would say Juno
Yep.
as well. So the Queen energy or the Queen archetype, Juno or Hera was the wife of Zeus or the wife of the gods. And one of the things that what Hera had to deal with was her husband, I'm just going to say it, cheating on her quite
Being a
often.
lying, cheating
Yes.
bastard.
You know what I mean? It wouldn't happen in today's age,
A good for nothing.
he would be
Yeah.
canceled so fast.
Yep.
But she had to deal with that. So one of the things that can come up with this archetype is like your devotion to what you're committed to.
Hmm.
Sometimes it can be to the fault, right? Or it can
Hmm.
involve jealousy
Yeah.
things that can come up, right? And it's just like this underlying embodiment that just tends to come up because of what you're committed to, you're so serious about, and you
Hmm.
expect this level of loyalty with the people, the partnerships that you have. And that is queen energy because she's dedicated, she's loyal, and she holds a high position. So
Hmm.
she wants to be surrounded by people who are going to support her mission, support her backbone, and overall just her mission, right? And the queen will tend to have a lot of confidence and a lot of pride in what she's doing, but that also comes with like a lot of responsibility and weight. And it's in a different sense than a mothering archetype. It's almost like the queen has this high status, so she could embody this if she's
Yeah.
high regard in her career or her particular field that she's involved in, or even if she's in performance, she maybe is the center stage performer,
Yep.
what have you. But it's whatever she's dedicated to. There's this level of high commitment that I think is involved with this. And, on that shadow side, again, there can be that like the power control dynamics or the jealousy that can come up because not everybody will always show up as she's willing to, right? Not everyone is as regal or loyal or committed as I think this queen archetype can embody.
Absolutely. Yeah. Whenever I think the queen archetype or I think Juno or Hera, I simultaneously think Venus and Capricorn. Venus and Capricorn, extremely high standards of excellency and loyalty and dedication in love and relationships, right?
Yeah.
And not only is that something that the queen is willing to provide, but like you say, it's something that she not only expects, but oftentimes demands,
Yes.
right? I noticed that about the queen archetype is that queens, like a natural bona fide queen, they're oftentimes kind of demanding, right?
Yeah.
And like rightfully so, they have a right to do that, but they don't suffer any fools. Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
And they definitely they're not they're not in the business of placating, I think, to people's emotions, right? They're
Yeah.
very much like, what are the facts? How have you, crossed a boundary, or how have you not upheld a standard? And how do I let you know that?
Yeah.
Right. And not waste time in letting you know that. Right. I always kind of think sometimes a little bit of like the man eater archetype. Right. I think that in some ways is definitely more of like a Lilith thing, but just in the sense of like having very high standards for men and not being afraid to hurt men's feelings, right? Because Hera, she stood by Jupiter, right? She put up with a lot of shit, but she also was not nice to him. Like
Right.
she snapped back at him, and she was also very vengeful, right? So
Yeah.
that's something that I see come up, especially when this is prominently placed in the chart, like having Juno conjunct Venus or the descendant, sometimes even the ascendant. People can, like you said, experience those themes of jealousy and vindictiveness in relationships.
Hmm.
Um, and also, like you were mentioning earlier, the queen, like for example, when you see this archetype at its most pure, right? These are women who oftentimes will stand by their partner, even if after they've been publicly humiliated sometimes,
Hmm.
or they've, gone through scandal and they know that those transgressions have happened, they will still stay with their partner for the
Hmm.
sake of commitment, right? It's Saturnian in that way, kind
Yeah.
of. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the first thing that's coming to my mind when you're saying that is like Hillary Clinton.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
it's because the status is also important to them.
Exactly. Yeah. Status for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You're so
Or
right.
for the Game of Thrones people out there, the mother of Joffrey, I'm drawing a blank now on her
Oh,
name.
yes. Cersei.
Cersei. She's
Yes.
the good example of that, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. She is very much the queen archetype.
Yes.
For sure. For better or for worse.
Right, right.
FYI, me and Michaela love Game of Thrones, so
Yeah.
there will probably be many a reference
It's a
to
whole season
that.
dedicated to Game of Thrones.
Yeah. Okay, well, with that being said, let's move on to everybody's favorite, maybe
Yeah.
not everybody's favorite, but the lover, right? The lover archetype, typically associated with Venus, Aphrodite, right? It's the most sensual, probably, of all of the archetypes. And whenever I think the lover, for example, like when I'm teaching on how Venus shows up in a very like raw way, I always use Anna Nicole Smith because she was actually Libra rising, Libra moon, Libra Venus, all on the ascendant,
Wow.
right? And she was known, right, for being basically this very sensuous, desirable, desirous, and, very kind of hedonistic woman, for better or for worse, really rooted in pleasure, right? That's the lover,
Yeah.
just, you know, um, shameless hedonism in a way, which is kind of in conjunction with some of the conversation we're going to have later today. But whenever I think the lover, I really do think these women who are just, and they exemplify a willingness to be connected to the body, to be embodied, right? To experience pleasure in all ways. And they're also quite receptive. I find that they are unafraid to receive, gifts or accolades or luxury or, attention. They are wells that can hold that kind of adoration. I think adoration is also
Yeah.
a great word for the lover, and there's another word that I'm looking for that's escaping me right now, typical Pisces Mercury. Cherish,
Cherish.
cherished.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I totally agree. They have that strong sex appeal, even if they're
hmm
not trying.
Yeah.
It can just be effortless. And I find that when people are really embodying this archetype, they're just like, I don't know why people just give me things.
Yes.
I don't know why just
Absolutely.
people just do things for me. It just happens.
I know.
you
It's
know,
like the sugar baby archetype.
yeah, 100%. And
Yeah.
it's amazing though, because if you are in a place where you have been lacking receiving and you want more abundance and you want to receive more money, more gifts, more love, more attention, when you really tap into this this behavior of being of just letting go and kind of embodying more of your captivating kind of sense or tapping into your sacral energy or your sensuality, you really do open up that flow of femininity and you do become a magnet. And I think that these people who are embodying that specifically are just these natural magnets. I mean,
Absolutely.
Anna Nicole Smith's a great example of that. Um, Obviously, our famous blonde. Hold on. Not
Marilyn
Madonna.
Monroe,
Marilyn Monroe, thank you.
Pam Anderson.
Yeah, all of them. Oh, Pammy's
Yeah.
another one, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? So they definitely have this magnetism about them and they tend to be moved by love. And I do think there
Hmm.
is a similarity between the maiden,
Yeah.
except with the lover, she's a bit more mature.
Hmm.
There's like that next step
Yeah,
within that.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
She almost knows how to get what she wants with what she has. So,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yep, absolutely. And when we think about Venus, right, astrologically and our relationship with her in our natal charts, oftentimes when you ask someone the question, how attractive do you feel? How magnetic do you feel, right? How much are you able to pull into you with silent tactics, right? With seduction, with energy, with presence.
Yeah.
That's all going to be determined by somebody's relationship with their Venus, right? So it makes sense that the lover is very much the embodiment of Aphrodite or of Venus. And yeah, I definitely think that, the lover is the embodiment of what men and women alike lust after, right?
Yeah.
I find that women who really exemplify the lover archetype oftentimes are the women who receive the wrathful vengeance of the queen archetype,
Oh,
right? Because the
100.
lover
Yes.
the lover is the woman who has been untamed by marriage, by career, right? By expectation. She does not temper her sexuality for the sake of appeasing anybody. And that oftentimes makes women in her presence quite uncomfortable
Yeah.
and men very desirous.
Right.
Mhm.
100%. Yeah. Yeah. So because of that, it tends to have like difficulty just holding down a relationship, but
Mhm.
more like polygamy, you know, more
Yeah.
acquainted with polygamy, or, they might have a backup partner, you know,
Yep.
in their second phone. You know, we
For
don't know.
sure.
We
For
don't know.
sure.
It's okay.
It's
Um,
okay. No
so
judgment here.
we'll go to an opposite version of
I know.
that.
I was going to say this is literally the antithesis.
So, where you go into the sage,
Hmm.
and it is interesting because one of my old best friends reminds me of the sage very much. So when I'm talking about this, I feel like I am just channeling her. But the sage is also related in mythology with Athena, and a part of their gift is they are very intelligent and
Hmm.
practical type of women
Yeah.
and they come with really good strategy. And so, these women are very intelligent. Picturing my friend with her books and her wisdom, and she
Hmm.
doesn't really need to do much. They tend to be more driven by knowledge and conversation. So very feminine, still very relational. Definitely have this ability for attraction, but they're using their intelligence and their knowledge and their brilliance more so as their innate gifts.
Yep.
And it tends to be their top priority to gain more wisdom and insight. And I think that these women tend to be attracted more to other people, like friendships and also relationships in their life, orientated to others who are more hardworking. And I would say
Yeah.
like
For
maybe
sure.
like blue collar. or
Absolutely.
pink collar is like my new thing for girls. Girly is the pink collar work.
Yep.
But, it can be hard for them to tap into their passion, their intimacy at times, not because they don't have it, but because they're so cerebral.
Hmm.
They're so in their wisdom and their head and their logic. And, that's a part of the storyline with Athena was she was here to help plan and give wisdom and insight and strategy. And so I think when you need long-term strategy for your life, we can tap into this archetype where we can use our wisdom. Like, hey, I know I'm hot and I know I'm intelligent, but I need a strategy and I need a plan here,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely. I think that the sage archetype is so fascinating. I always think of Miranda from Sex and the City,
Totally.
um, because I find especially when you see the asteroid Pallas Athena prominently placed in a woman's chart on the ascendant, on the sun, on the moon. These are women who oftentimes naturally decenter men. I find that that tends to be a large part of their journey, is that they decenter them because they don't really they don't crave, I think, being desired in the same way that other people do, at least, or other archetypes do, at least physically. It's a much more, like you said, cerebral, intellectual kind of approach to things.
Hmm.
And oftentimes they decenter men because they're so focused on their own ambitions.
Yeah.
They're a woman with a plan, right? They
Yeah.
have ambitions, they have goals, and they know how to get there.
Yeah.
And they don't struggle with dependency in the same way that some of the archetypes, the other archetypes do. I think both, the sage and the huntress in that way are
Yeah.
both very, very independent and sovereign kind of archetypes.
Yeah.
And I think the sage in particular is quite interesting because when you look at the story of Athena, she was well known for being far more respected than her male counterpart, her brother Mars. Right? Or Ares, right? The god of war. Okay. I mean, to the Romans respected Mars far much more, but to the Greeks looked at Mars like an idiot. He was
Yeah.
constantly making mistakes, being impulsive, putting his foot in his mouth, just fucking shit up, for
Yeah.
lack of a
Yeah.
better term.
Yeah.
And then out comes Athena in a very patriarchal society. And actually, they had deep, deep respect for her to the point that they named Athens after her,
Yeah.
right? Because of how much they valued her abilities in strategy and planning and calculation and her ability to be tempered and measured and have wisdom far beyond her years. And you see that in the lives of women who represent that sage archetype. And then another thing that I wanted to mention about Athena in conjunction with this relationship that the sage has with the prioritization of female friendships in particular, I
Mm.
find is that Athena, her full name is actually hyphenated. It's Pallas Athena.
Hmm.
And she took that name on in homage to her friend Pallas, who we can get into that story another time, but tragically lost her life. And one of the core components of basically the narrative and arc of Athena was her deep connection to this woman, right? And her reverence and respect and admiration of this woman. And I think we see that in the sage archetype as well, as you see that these are women who very much are champions of the intelligence of women, right? Of the ambitions and successes and excellency of the female mind. And these are women who definitely, I think they champion a message of women being independent and striving and oftentimes overcoming their male counterparts in the same way that Athena did with her brother Mars.
Yeah. I absolutely agree with all of that.
Hmm.
I'm just still visualizing my friend too
Your
in my
friend.
head. Yeah. I'm
Are
like,
we literally just describing her?
yeah, I'm like, hope you're listening today. Yeah. Yeah. I think that was beautiful.
Cool.
Do
All
you?
right. So, moving on to the mystic, I feel like I would love to hear your thoughts on this because when I think of the mystic, in part, I heavily think of you.
Really?
Yes. Yeah.
Really? I was gonna say you. That's
No,
so
you.
funny.
It's like that Spider-Man meme.
I was like, oh, this is you. That's so funny. Well, so okay, so the mystic, she's definitely this very spiritual, like high vibe, high energy person, somebody who is very connected to her intuition. And I do want to say off the bat that not every woman who is a mystic is showing up in like all black with a witch hat and
Yeah.
her crystals. You know, I've had
There's
my
different
own,
fonts.
right. I've had my own transition when I've been very much like I'm the mystic in my Jimmy Choos. And then I'm also,
Hell yeah.
the mystic in my favorite sandals that were $1 at a store, right?
Yeah.
So it's like we gotta just like throw it out there that like the mystic just means like somebody who's just like rolling around in the dirt and doing weird magic with rabbits. It's just not the case. Because people ask me that. They're
Oh,
like, so when I tell them what I do, they're like, so do you do magic and like kill bunnies? And I'm like, no, I'm not sitting on my cauldron,
what?
Yeah. Yeah, I've been asked, especially at
Oh,
the gym.
we need to do a whole episode about
Yeah.
unraveling the narrative around witches and witchcraft.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
Comment down below if you would like to see that episode.
I already could subscribe to that. But so I tend to think that these women don't align just with like the basic hustle culture. And
Hmm.
they tend to be more of like homebodies, which yes, like I love
Yeah, a thousand
love to
percent.
be home. But that could be the downfall because the mystic can coop themselves up too
Hmm.
much, right?
Yep.
Because they love to be, they find more of themselves when they're isolated or when they are alone and kind of in tune with their own intuition and themselves, and they can
Hmm.
live in their own little alignment. But they're also not somebody who is essentially cares about achievement or like overtly connected to some sort of success. It's more about living in alignment with your intuition and your
Right.
vibe and your emotions and connecting yourself to like the ebbs and flows of life.
Yes.
You
Yeah.
know, and at certain times, like I've found magic in sweeping the floor, all of the dog hair off my
Hmm.
floor, and having ritual and alignment in just mundane stuff. And I think that's one of the healthy ways to embody this mystic persona. And then also being okay being alone, like not needing to regulate my nervous system or my emotions with other people. That comes into this inner
Mm.
knowing and this inner knowledge that the mystic they can really empower themselves so much with self-sovereignty and self-knowledge because they
Hmm.
are okay spending time alone and cultivating their own inner peace and tranquility,
Hmm.
which is why I think these women won't naturally be gravitated towards like hustle culture or dare I say like a corporate job or 9 to 5.
Never.
I think that it just wouldn't align.
Mm-mm. No,
Yeah.
definitely not.
Yeah.
Especially because I think you hit the nail right on the head that when I think, the mystic, she is associated with the goddess Hestia or Vesta, right?
Yeah.
And for those of you who are listening who don't know her story, Vesta or Hestia, again, Greco-Roman preference, whatever you choose, she was basically offered a seat on council with all of the other gods in the pantheon, right? She's the sister of Zeus or Jupiter. And when he overthrew their father, Saturn or Kronos, and basically kicked out all of the Titans, Hestia was, of course, offered a place or a seat in the pantheon, and she actually denied it. She forgoed, right? Again, like you say, that kind of status and that worldly success, so to speak,
Yeah.
because instead she chose to assume the role as the one who would tend to the primordial fire on Mount Olympus, this fire that has to keep burning. If not, there is a cataclysmic event, right? And life
Yeah.
ceases to exist.
Yeah.
And so I think like very strongly in the storyline of the mystic and in the experience of the mystic is the sacrifice of certain comforts, certain pleasures, certain, wins and worldly successes and materialism and things of this nature for the sake of whether it's religious or simply spiritual devotion, right?
Yeah.
There is a path that the mystic is walking
Yeah.
where this is a life where it's a life that they're living in dedication to that which they find sacred, right? And for some people,
Hmm.
their dogs might be what are sacred to them, right? For other people, it might be their garden, right? You
Yeah.
see Vesta, for example, in Taurus in the second house, right? And they're like an extremely devoted gardener or something like that.
Yeah.
It takes a different role, but I do think that it's about, like you said, imbuing that feeling of every moment is sacred. Everything can be sacred because the nature of this world and the nature of my existence within this world is inherently sacred. So let me be conscientious of that. Let me hold that in my heart and let me imbue that in everything that I do. I feel like is, yeah.
I love that you brought that up, and it was such a strong embodiment of Vesta in the chart. And
Hmm.
when I was in Greece, I actually learned too that if they did something wrong while in their service attending to the flame,
Hmm.
they had a horrible death, right?
Really?
They were buried alive, essentially.
Oh my
Right?
God, I just got full body chills. Ooh,
Yes.
oh my
So if
gosh.
they if the flame went out or they got caught having relations because they had to remain
Right.
virgin
Yeah.
through
Yeah.
their service, they suffered a excruciating, painful, very off. They would basically bury them alive or put them down in a chamber underground and let them starve to death. And they were
It's like how
released.
they suffocated the flame, they must then suffocate.
Right. And then but if they fulfilled their service and their purpose, they were released around like 30 years old, which we know they didn't really live that long back then. So they
Right.
basically were dedicating their whole life to this. And so I think to add on to that, that we obviously live hopefully longer than 30 years old now, but if you are living the mystic archetype, there is some sacrifice that you pay for a while if you are
Hmm.
so devoted to your own inner journey and your spiritual journey.
Yeah.
But there is that liberation and that freedom at the end if you fulfill this kind of
Yep.
embodiment, right? If you go through this journey, some people they become monks for a while, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And they go within, and there is a sacrifice there where they're not married and
Mhm.
they give up other bodily pleasures, and there's no right or wrong answer. It's just for them. But then there's also this nirvana that you can get
Yep.
achieved through that kind of embodiment of going in that spiritual journey.
Right, absolutely. It's like it makes me think so much about the sixth and 12th house axis, not to dive too deep into that, but I always tell people who have, anybody listening, if you have a heavy emphasis on the sixth and 12th house, for better or for worse, it's like in this lifetime, you have to learn to serve your higher power or you will suffer, right?
Yeah.
It's like whether it's, actually physically manifest or just internally, like with kind of these existential crises, feeling lost, anxiety, dread, all of these things, right?
Yeah.
And then suddenly they either come to the spontaneous realization or return to a spiritual practice. And the peace that's brought to their life instantaneously, it's miraculous.
Yep.
And I think that in that same way, when you're walking the path of the mystic, it really is, this ebb and flow of coming to the conclusion that you have no choice but to fully commit, right? And fully surrender.
Yep. Correct.
Hmm. Period.
Period.
Okay. All right. And our final archetype, the huntress. I love the huntress. The huntress is, I always think of Katniss Everdeen from,
Totally.
what was it
Hunger
called?
Games.
The Hunger Games.
Yeah.
Yes. In the same way that the sage is also, very independent and self-actualized. And a sovereign, I think the huntress is as well, right?
Yeah.
She's very much of herself for herself and is somebody, I find that the huntress is both very goal oriented and also very sensitive to the people in her community and in her environment. It's almost like a combination of the sage and the mother archetype. Do you know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And so in myth too, she was the sister of Apollo, and she was born before Apollo was born. And her
Yeah.
story is her helping her mother actually give birth to Apollo, like fresh out of the womb, right? So she's like this
Yeah.
amazing baby. But, a part of her storyline that we're taught is she's also a protector of women and children, which is
Hmm.
why I love it gives her this extra superhero type of archetype to deal with or to
Yeah.
chew on, which is very much related to Katniss from the Hunger Games too, because
Hmm.
she's protecting her sister, essentially, right?
Yeah.
From having to partake in the Hunger Games. But yeah, this embodiment is definitely like a hungry woman,
Yeah.
she is focused on her goals. Marriage can be involved, but it's not her first priority.
Mm-mm.
Romance, love, it's not her first priority. Maybe not as considered as soft as a woman, but loving and compassionate still. But
Hmm.
there's this brave energy behind the huntress, where her goals are so strong for her that she has no other desire but to just go after it and achieve it. So, I think that these women tend to set like high goals and they
Yeah.
will achieve them. And it might not be in that soft feminine way that it looks like. It might be a little bit more direct or harsh, but I love this embodiment because I feel like as women we should stand up for ourselves and we should have a bit more courage and bravery. It's easy for women like us as Aries, we're kind of strong in general. We can embody this more masculine archetype. And I think the huntress is kind of rooted in that essentially, or
Yeah.
in Aries in itself, because it's about speaking up and being more bold,
Absolutely.
like overcoming your challenges.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I find that the huntress also, I just intuitively said Katniss Everdeen, but even now that I think about it more, I'm like, she is the living, breathing embodiment of Artemis. I mean, even she was an archer, right? And Artemis is an archer, right? And she was an extremely skilled archer. And so that idea of being laser focused on a target, right? And being kind of, I find that the huntress can sometimes be a little one-track minded, right? They get their idea or they get their sights on something, and it doesn't matter whose toes are in the way, right?
Yeah.
Toes are getting crushed.
Yeah.
Because, but I also think it's such a fascinating archetype because on the one hand, it has such a hard exterior, and on the other hand, it has this, innate and kind of proverbial connection to, like you said, to women, to children, and also to the wilderness, right? It wasn't just that Artemis was the goddess of the hunt. She was also the goddess of the wilderness and the wild, right? And there's also kind of that wild woman archetype in the huntress. Like if you've ever read the book Women Who Run with Wolves, I feel like that's also like an example of that kind of archetype in action.
That's like an older one, right?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and one thing that you brought up about how, like, again, with this archetype, relationships, romantic relationships in particular, are not necessarily centered. One of the things that you mentioned earlier with the sage, which I also find in the huntress, is this, which is women who have these archetypes quite strong in their lives or prominently placed asteroids like these in their chart. Oftentimes, they need a partner who challenges them in a way because most people feel soft and weak in comparison, and that I find revolts them. Like
Yeah.
they feel repulsed by men who cannot be even stronger than they are,
Yeah.
right? And that's why I brought up earlier Miranda, right? I think Miranda is a great example of the sage huntress archetype because she's always, struggling with Steve in Sex and the City, who's
Yeah.
like, jobless and kind of soft and like a nice guy, but
Yeah.
she always kind of resents him because he's just not as ambitious and striving, right, as
Yeah.
she is.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. They want the competition, and especially with the Huntress, she needs the competitive
Hmm.
aspect in order for her to be sharp,
Yeah,
you know?
absolutely.
So I think it's important for, yeah, women who resonate with that, just if, and especially with your partner, that one of the things I say is the most important decision you can make in your life is who your partner is.
Hmm.
So, if your partner is kind of dulling down your skills, like think about it, it's like a survival game almost for you.
Yeah,
So, are you getting sharper, stronger, more
yeah,
resilient, right?
I love
Or
that.
you're losing your skills?
Yeah, you need a strong stone to sharpen a blade.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
love that. So, if you remember our riddle from earlier, the answer to this riddle is now about to be answered because one of the archetypes that we are going to focus on today is the creator or the muse. So, in ancient Greek mythology, we have these nine female deities known as the Muses. And the word muse is actually from the ancient Greek word musa, which means a goddess of art. But really, they were these goddesses who were specified to preside over different artistic and scientific mediums, right? But also, another source of the word comes from the verb to ponder, right? To muse. So there's this kind of interplay here of there being an artistic and an intellectual component to
Mhm.
the muses. And when it comes to, their story and the mythology behind them, the Muses were basically consorts to the god Apollo, right? Who we mentioned earlier. Interesting that for our first episode on the Voices of Delphi, we're going to cover the Muses
I know.
because, yeah, they were basically, in some stories they were the friends, in other stories they were the lovers, right? In layman's terms, they were kind of the groupies of Apollo. They were always around him because Apollo, aside from being a solar deity, was most famously known as the god of arts and drama and music, right? Creativity, okay? So the Muses are said to be born from Zeus and Mnemosyne, right? So Zeus is either Zeus or Jupiter, the Greco-Roman version, and he is the god of the gods, right? And astrologically, I think it's interesting because we know that Jupiter primarily is going to be representative of one's relationship with divinity and wisdom. And Mnemosyne, she was the goddess of memory, right? So I think it's interesting. I was telling Makayla about this earlier to think about how the experience of muse, right? Of inspiration, of having these muses work through you is a connection between divinity and memory, right? And that through our creativity, through our musings, through our scientific and artistic and creative output, we create a visual or sometimes an auditory or whatever record of how divinity moves through us. So when it comes to the muses, we have nine of them, right? So we're going to go through them quickly. And it's important to remember that when it comes to what the muses presided over, they were created by the Greeks, right? So there's certain connotations that they have that are very specific to the Greeks. For example, Calliope, right? The first of the nine muses. She was basically thought of as well as kind of like the captain of all the muses. She was known as the goddess of epic poetry. We have Clio, who was the goddess of history. We have Erato, who was the goddess of eroticism and love and poetry, erotic poetry. We have Eratote, who was the goddess of music. We have Melpone. I always forget how to
It's
pronounce
hard.
it.
It's
It's
hard.
hard. Who was the goddess of tragedy. Polyhymnia, who was the goddess of harmony and rhythm and rhyme and sacred poetry. We have Terpsichore. I listened to a podcast a while ago where somebody was like, that sounds like a Pokemon name, and it's true.
It it literally sounds like an STD to me. I don't know why. Dude, I don't know why. It's like I have terpsichore. It's like, oh, that sucks. Like,
Sorry.
I don't know why.
Sorry, can't make it today. I'm down with terpsichore. That's crazy. So
Oh.
she was the goddess of dance, okay? And then we have Talia, which is a common name, right? She was actually the goddess of comedy. And then finally, my favorite, my personal favorite, we have Urania, who was the goddess of astronomy and astrology and all things divination.
Yeah.
So, when it comes to, how the muses show up in our lives, it's basically thought that we are vessels through which the muses can flow, right? So, for example, when we talk about being in a flow state, right, it's kind of this place where the conscious mind has shut itself off, right? And through us can flow these divine forces, right? And
Mhm.
so, for example, musicians in ancient times, they would pray, right, to different muses in the hopes that the muses would channel through them, right?
Mhm.
It was kind of thought that, like, any creation that you make, whether it be a painting, a song, a drama, a poem, that none of it actually came from you. It all
Mhm.
came from the muses, right? And that they were just expressing themselves through the vessel, which is the human body.
Mhm.
And I think it's really interesting to think about this relationship between needing to shut off the conscious mind and
Mhm.
get quiet and
Mhm.
pause
Mhm.
in order for the muses to work through you, right?
Mhm.
Because, we can talk about this a little bit more later on when we start talking about sacral energy and how to work with it and ignite it. But I was thinking in preparation for this conversation about times when I felt very creatively blocked and stuck. And I realized, there is a connection between my creativity and my prioritization of silence,
Mhm.
right? My
Mhm.
prioritization of stillness and silence. And that when I am in constant movement and when I am constantly filling my head with other people's ideas and thoughts and musings, right? That
Yes.
the muses can't work through me, right? And that it's through silence that we allow their kind of radio frequency to descend and move through us. So I think that the muses are really fascinating as well because we can see how they come up in different charts, right? So, for example, I was doing some research about how we have some of these asteroids come up in celebrity charts. And one of them that stood out to me very clearly was in the chart of Michael Jackson. He was born with a 6-degree Virgo sun, and he has the asteroid Polyhymnia, right? So, just to refresh your memory, the asteroid that is named after the muse who is responsible for hymns, harmony, and sacred poetry and lyricism, directly conjunct his sun, almost to the second. I think it's like a 3-second orb or something like that.
And it's fascinating because if people want to tap into maybe some gifts that maybe they feel like they might have available but not aren't quite sure, you can look these up in your chart. Like you can see if you have any
Hmm.
of these making an aspect to anything in your chart, and then that gives you at least a little bit of awareness of like who you could start to channel or work
Yeah,
with.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I'll never forget when I first started studying under one of my astrological mentors, Tim Ness. He asked me, "Where is Urania in your chart?" And I
Mm.
was like, "Hello, what is that?" And he was like, "She's an asteroid. She's named after the muse of astronomy and astrology. Where is she? Because, if this is meant to be something professional for you, I've never met an astrologer who doesn't have Urania prominently placed in their chart."
Yeah.
Lo and behold, she's directly conjunct my sun. I'm sure you could find the same thing as well.
That's so cool.
So everybody, I think, has a relationship
Yeah.
with one of these muses, right? Another one that I wanted to mention was Emily Dickinson. Emily Dickinson is actually from my hometown, interestingly enough, and she was born with, I believe it was her Venus, directly conjunct the asteroid, um, uh, the crazy named one, Melpomene. Melpomene.
Happening.
Melpomene. And Melphine was the goddess of tragedy, right? Dramatic tragedy.
Yeah.
And so much of Emily Dickinson's work was basically a showcasing of how you could find beauty in tragedy,
Yeah.
right? That interplay between um, life and death, light and dark, and how tragic life can be, but how, pleasurable, how you can find pleasure in those things. It's a little masochistic in
Yeah.
nature, but one of her most famous poems is "I saw death and I said no." So there's that darkness to her. Um,
Interesting. Also,
yeah.
interesting title for when we talk about the sacral chakra. And
Mm-hmm.
well, like, but I saw a death and I said no. That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, Out of curiosity, out of all of these muses, who do you resonate with the most, or who do you think you would resonate with the most?
Well, I want to say Urania,
Yeah.
obviously. I feel like I actually have to look this up in my chart. It's been like a very long time since I remember maybe where Urania was. But I believe I had terpsichore, ironically, somewhere close to my sun or my Mercury.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And
Yes.
I danced like I did jazz ballet. I wasn't like the A plus star, but I danced when I was younger, and now one of the things I want to do soon is like learn fire dancing, so
Yes,
it
I've seen you
resonates.
post videos about that. I
Yeah.
think that's so awesome.
Yeah. What about
Yeah,
you
and so
though?
definitely Urania for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. Well, yeah,
Maybe
right on your
Cleo.
sun. Yeah.
Maybe Cleo. I love a good history moment. Maybe Talia. I consider myself.
Yeah. Yeah.
But one of the things that I also wanted to mention that I thought was kind of like a lovely piece of food for thought is that you know, Mnemosyne, right? The goddess of memory, the mother of the Muses.
Yeah.
It's interesting because the way that the Muses were discussed in ancient Greece is basically like they had a way of helping the humans escape memory, right?
Mm.
The memory of their day, the memory of hardship, the memory of suffering,
Mm.
right? That they were a way through which we could transcend those things. And again, the combination of Jupiter and Mnemosyne, right? Jupiter, natural ruler of Pisces, at least in traditional astrology, very much connected to the principles and properties of transcendental experiences,
Yeah.
right? And so imagine a life in which you have to go about all of your mundane duties, right? You have to go through the trials and tribulations. You have to go through the suffering, and yet you can't come home and listen to a good song and dance. Those things don't exist.
Right.
You can't go to a museum and see a beautiful painting, right? You can't sit down on the couch and watch a tragedy. You can't watch The Notebook. You can't watch Titanic, right? All of these things don't exist. It's like, the muses not only give us a way to express, right, the divine through us, but they also give us a way to transcend the mundane, to transcend pain, suffering,
Yeah.
and to exist kind of in a higher realm.
Yeah. Yeah, both of them are locking in the archetype of the mother and the father, but then all the muses together,
Hmm.
all of them are locking into, for me, the right side of the brain, which is the
Hmm.
creative and intuitive side. And like for people who don't know, like when you would like to open up and channel your intuition or connect to the other side or connect to past loved ones, become a medium, become a channel, tap into your creativity. Everyone has these abilities. And it's about learning how to disconnect from the linear logical side of your left brain, which is the one
Hmm.
that's just going to want to create order in things. And literally,
Yeah.
the only left side, the only thing that is responsible for this left side is actually channeling the information that is coming from the right side, which will
Yep.
also incorporate the memory that you've mentioned. Whether it is long-term memory or short-term memory, long-term memory can be on the left side as well. In some cases, we wanted to talk about Uranus, for example. It's a different day, I
Right.
think. But considering the water here, Jupiter, the moon embodying higher wisdom, higher knowledge, the moon representing this this emotional connection to your feeling and how things like art, creativity, music, movement, and dance, and how they leave an emotional imprint on you,
Mhm.
you know, creates that imprint of that memory in your actual emotional chamber. And so a lot of those things can be a way for you, like you said, to alleviate yourself when you're kind of in that flow and letting things move, alleviate yourself from this mundane or really hard tasks of just normal life, painful things in life, routine things in life, things that make you feel stagnant or dull or even depressed at times.
Right.
So channeling or connecting with these muses is a great way. I'm already feeling lifted talking about it,
Hmm.
like elevated, but
Hmm.
can hopefully bring you there. And of course, I think some of these, like one of them does connect to the darker side of memory and emotion because that exists too, but a way to work through any painful emotions or experiences or channel and create from any painful emotion is actually to re-feel it anyway.
Yeah.
You have to re-feel it anyway in order to change the storyline or create something from that embodied experience in order to heal it and send it off.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
you make a great point. And do you know what it makes me think of? We like briefly kind of touched on this before we started recording, but how this combination of the goddess of memory, right, and of Jupiter and Zeus. For those of you who don't know, traditionally, Jupiter is said to be exalted, right, or happiest in the sign of Cancer. And Cancer is ruled by the moon. And both Cancer and the moon, in conjunction, oftentimes will come up in conversations about memory. So when I was thinking about this combination, it felt very Cancerian in nature. I think it's fitting that all of these goddesses are women, right,
Yeah.
as well. And that, Cancer is the sign that comes at the the vernal solstice. It's the lightest and most fertile time of year. It's the most creative time of year when literally life is just teeming everywhere you look. And, there's that component and the creativity aspect as well, but also what you said that really made me think about this and bring it up to begin with is how, this idea of transcendence, right? It all starts with an initiation of that journey through the three water signs, right?
Yep.
With Cancer, we initiate an engagement with and a reflection on that emotion. With Scorpio, we allow it to hurt us again.
Yep.
And with Pisces, we heal it and we transcend it, right? And so, this idea of, the creative process as a way to transcend harsh emotions, transcend trauma, transcend pain by being that initiation, right? That initiation point into re experiencing and then moving forward, I think
Yeah.
was a beautiful point that you made.
Thank you. Yeah. It's a cycle.
It is a cycle.
It's why we play the same song on repeat some weeks,
I heard
Yeah.
that. Heard that.
Yep. Do we transition to the sacral chakra?
Yeah, I feel like that would be a good transition, jumping off of what we were talking about with the sign of Cancer,
Yeah.
Cancer associated with the womb, jumping right into the womb waters of the sacral chakra.
Yeah, so if for those of you who don't know, the sacral chakra is an energy center in your system. And we actually have many. We have many, many
Mhm.
energy centers in our system, but mainstream focuses on the main seven that will go up your body. And it starts at the root, which is around the anus, and then the second one will be the sacral. So it's right around the sexual organs. It rules over, the hips, your sexual organs, the womb type of area, and it governs your ability to give and receive energy. And it's also, where we meet relationships with ourselves and with other people. You can
Mhm.
throw your sexuality under this umbrella, your creativity, your
Mhm.
ability to manifest, And one of the things that I like to focus on with the sacral chakra is our ability to say yes, please, and no, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
Say it again. Say it
right?
again.
This is an area where, it can show up as blocks for some people with relationship blocks or money blocks and creativity blocks. When you feel stagnant, when you're not feeling
Mhm.
abundant, when you're not feeling like you have an ability to trust other people, these would
Yep.
be prime examples that there is, mistrust somewhere resonating within you, or there can be a fear of pleasure or some type of rigidity in yourself, right? And rigidity
Hmm.
can really lead to that lack of ability to have creation or create anything, you know?
Right.
And it's also important to note that, sexuality and pleasure falls under this umbrella because, it takes sex to create a child and have a baby or some sort of that. And also just to feel open enough to be with a partner, to give and
Right.
receive that type of energy. And
Hmm.
it's an important, the lower three chakras to me are seriously the
The
foundation of
most
your
important.
life.
Absolutely.
And it's like, it's so important to focus on these because I think a lot of people think, oh, we must open our third eye or lead with our crown. But if you're not
Mm-mm.
grounded and rooted in your lower three chakras, then you are looking through a filter through your third eye lens that is heavily miscued
Misguided.
and
Yep.
yeah, and then you don't actually have an openness and you aren't really a conduit or a channel for your creation
Right.
to really come through. And another thing that I see personally, I've experienced and also with my clients is that it takes a long time to work through your lower three chakras. It will take a long
Hmm.
time to work through the sacral,
Yep.
and you constantly have to go back to it. So it's not about like perfecting it here, and removing your blocks or whatever and feeling more free, but like just knowing when these things come up, right? When these blockages
Yep.
can come up. And so one of my affirmations that I like to say is saying yes, please, or no, thank you. And that's just because the situations that are presented to you within your sacral chakra mostly come from your reflection in your relationships.
Hmm.
And they mostly come from your friendships, your partners, your relationship to your money, story, whatever it is, even family dynamics, although mostly root chakra,
Hmm.
fall under your sacral. And so every time you are bringing in a relationship dynamic that is showing you something that you don't like, it's showing you a vibration that you're carrying in yourself that is an opportunity for you to change.
Right.
And one of the other, I guess, things I subscribe to is that relationships in our life are actually meant to teach us they're meant to show us not love so that we
Hmm.
can return to self-love ourselves. And it's
Mm.
not to say that we can't have long-term relationships or fulfilling relationships and partnerships because we can and we do, but there are always going to be times when our partners or relationships are teaching us about what it means to not be loved or to not be respected or to
Hmm.
not be seen. And it's
Yep.
always an invitation to say, yes, I'll accept that, or no, thank you, I won't.
Right.
And either, it's situation dependent, but it's always an opportunity for you to reclaim your own empowerment in your sacral chakra and to learn how to have a relationship with yourself that is built on self-love and self-trust at the end
Hmm.
of the day. And to know that these people, they're not reflecting negativity back at you because you're not worthy of love, or you're not creative, or you're not desirable, or you're not worthy of trust or respect or
Right.
union, right? It's not the case. It's just a vibration that you are, because you're a powerful being as a co-creator with the universe, it's just a vibration that you're
Hmm.
actually vibrating. It's just a message that, hey, this is an opportunity to work on this
Right.
self-love journey, right?
Hmm.
And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on the sacral but it's like one of the most powerful things I think that the chakra system can teach us is that we are powerful beings because
Mhm.
whatever we are vibrating, we are calling in.
Mhm.
And that just shows us how powerful we are. Because if, I the other things that I have mentioned with the sacral is that it can be either battlefields or playgrounds in
Mhm.
this department. And
Yes.
so, right? So
Yes, for sure.
if you are vibrating here, I am creative, I am self-love, I can embody all of these feminine archetypes that we talked about, right? I'm intelligent, I'm a lover, I'm a queen status, and you're really vibrating on that core level, all of this self-respect and the self-love, you're gonna vibrate, you're gonna call in other people that are going to reflect that back at you. You will also vibrate and call in people who will challenge that because there's almost
Mhm.
like this shifting off. I think that needs to happen with the,
Mhm.
like the debris, right? And the debris of people that maybe were there before you shifted in your sacral chakra,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's like
Yoni
the
steams,
vibration.
ladies.
Yeah.
Yoni steams.
Yeah. Yogi Steves.
Get rid of those old partners. Yeah, for real. Like there is, and again, it's like the water element, it holds memory.
Yeah.
So much of our memory is held in the sacral, right?
Yeah.
That's why, for example, women will have, like an orgasm and they have a very kind of emotional response. They'll cry. They don't even know why they're crying. They're not sad, but it's an emotional release because, grief, right? Or shame or disappointment or anger, frustration from past events that are unrelated
Yeah.
are being released through
Yeah.
that energy center, right? So I think you're right on the money. Like I was just kind of in awe as were talking. I was like, oh, this is so good. So
Yeah.
thank you for all of that. And I think that when it comes to the sacral, right? When I meet somebody, especially women who are maybe they're like sacral dominant or their sacral center is just open, right? These are women who really exude that kind of goddess energy.
Yeah.
They're juicy, they're fertile, they're flexible, they're mobile, they're adaptable. They're kind of centered in their hips, right? They have
Yeah.
this sway to them. For example, people who struggle to get comfortable dancing, right? It's typically a really locked up sacral center, right? You
Yeah.
get people moving their hips, and all of a sudden, like all of their inhibitions down. And another thing that I think about with the sacral is a big one, shame. I think about shame a
Yeah.
lot for the sacral center.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's a great jumping off point to talk a little bit about Lilith and her relationship as a sacral goddess, because as women, especially within the society we live in and have lived in for millennia, there is so much shame that is projected on women who exist in their sacral energy, right?
Yes. Yeah.
They are either women who need to be confined to a specific place, a brothel, a strip club,
Yeah.
right? Whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
And that is their role in society. But they can't be walking the streets. They can't be in the workplace. They can't be mothers, right?
Right.
And there's so much shame that we place upon women that basically makes them fracture off their
Yeah.
sacral center. There's so many women who are completely disconnected from it. And when
Yeah.
you said earlier about how if you're ever going to get into working with, energetic rebalancing and really diving into healing your chakral system, the three lower centers, absolutely. Like you
Yeah.
were right on the money when you said that. So many people, especially in today's day and age, they're focused on the 5D and open your third eye, like you were saying. But people oftentimes don't realize that if your lower three are out of whack,
Yeah.
it's probably likely that your third eye is overactive and actually it just produces paranoia, anxiety, and illusion,
Yeah.
right?
100%. Yes.
So,
100%.
like, get grounded, y'all.
Yeah.
And I think when it comes to this shame aspect, right? Shame about wanting more. right? How
Hmm.
many of us have felt ashamed of wanting to ask more of our partners, right?
Yeah.
How many of us have felt ashamed of wanting to ask for more out of life, or felt ashamed of just enjoying our physicality, our sensuality, right?
Yeah.
Being proud and vocal about the fact that we're sexy, we're vital, we're desirable, right?
Yeah.
Like these are all attributes of women that secretly everybody kind of desires and lusts after, but
Yeah.
then when women take ownership of it, there's so much shame that's projected on them. And I think that Lilith story is such a beautiful example of that. I love talking about Lilith
Yeah.
because she is very much the death to the patriarchy goddess for sure.
Yes.
Um,
Hmm.
like for those of you who don't know the story of Lilith, essentially, in a nutshell, she is said to be the first woman, right? It's kind of this rewrite of the original scripture that Eve was the first woman, right?
Yeah.
But actually, even if you go back in the Torah and some earlier scrolls, like still to this day, people acknowledge Lilith's existence. It's just in the Christian tradition, really, that they don't.
I'm really
Uh,
surprised how many people don't know the Lilith story
I
or have
know,
never heard of it. And
I
people
know.
that I've known that have gone to, which I guess doesn't surprise me, but Catholic schools growing up
Yep, no idea.
and no idea.
No idea. She's hiding in plain sight as the snake who tempted
Yeah.
Eve,
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but with Lilith, she was not made of Adam. She was made of the earth, right? She was sovereign and all unto her own. And she was placed in the Garden of Garden of Eve with Adam. And it came time for them to procreate and populate the world. And Lilith said, "Okay, Adam, lay down. I will get on top of you." And he said, "Huh?
Yeah.
What do you mean?
Yep.
You're a woman. What do you mean you'll get on top of me? That's my job." And she said, "Why would you say that? That's stupid." She's like, I'm an equal. We're not, you are not above me. I am not your servant. I am not your slave, right? Like, I am your equal. I have a right." And he was like not having it. So he goes to God and he asks God to basically speak to her and threaten her in order to get her to submit. And God says, "Lilith, if you do not submit to Adam, for he is a man and he is your husband, and you are simply just a woman, then I will banish you from the Garden of Eden and make you give birth to 1,000 children every day, and I will kill them in your presence." And Lilith, being her strong and insolent self, said, "Fuck all that. I'm leaving."
Yep. Yep.
She walked away. She turned
Yep.
around and she walked away and she exiled herself, right? And
Yeah.
like bad bitch move, honestly.
Yeah.
She exiled herself. She left the Garden of Eden, and she lived in isolation, and her myth has kind of developed over the course of time into her being this like succubus of the night coming in to steal men's sexual energy. But I find that to just be a patriarchal rewrite,
Yeah.
to detract away from the true meaning of her story, which is about feminine sovereignty and sexual sovereignty for women,
Yeah.
right? That you would rather isolate and exile yourself than submit to a man and admit or live in an agreed reality in which a woman is less than a man,
Yeah.
right? And I
Yeah.
think that she's just such a potent and powerful expression of that sacral energy, right? Because
Same.
she loved herself enough to choose pain and isolation,
Yeah.
right? And suffering in some ways,
Yep.
um, so that she didn't have to compromise in ways that she knew she didn't deserve.
Yeah. And I find that I love her story. I resonate with her so deeply. And
Hmm.
I find a lot of people who struggle with owning, I guess, the Lilith archetype in their life or even ownership over their sacral chakra. It is rooted in a issue actually in the root chakra, which
Hmm.
is it will always go back to the root where you need to work on your safety and security first.
Yep.
And in the root, it is learning that, and it sounds harsh, but it's not meant to be. but it is learning that other people will never give you that safety and security. And
Yep.
you can never rely on it on other people. And so that begins in the very beginning of your story is Lilith was able to feel a foundational sense of safety and security that she could provide for herself if she
Hmm.
left. And there was that unwavering strength. And so it's very important, I think, if, this comes up and you're like, wow, I do need sacral work, go actually back to the root chakra and look at the foundation of your life. And if you are outsourcing yourself for the protection and security of other people, if you're not saying, yes, please to things that you want and no thank you to things you don't want because you're dependent on somebody else or you're
Hmm.
dependent on something else, or you feel like life isn't supportive for you or the world isn't supportive for you, because a part of this bigger human journey here and hard journey, but overall empowering journey is the
Yep.
fact that you are an independent human and you are responsible for all of these things in your life. And so you can open up that sacral, you can embody the true, sensuality, creativity, openness, lubricated abundance that can
Yep.
come in this section if you actually work on your foundation. And you can walk around knowing, and maybe we should cover the root chakra in a different episode,
Yeah.
but walk around knowing that you are safe no matter where you are and what you're doing because
Hmm.
you can trust in your own foundation, right? So
Yep.
you're not tied to a relationship for whatever purpose, and you always have the ability to say yes, please, and no, thank you to anything. And that I think really opens you up to have better partnerships and better
Absolutely.
pleasure when you're
Yeah.
not overly reliant the because it is a Venus kind of dynamic here too. So,
Hmm.
you have to balance the scales. They really can't be tipped one way or the other because then power dynamics come into play and life gets unfair.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. As you were talking, it was also making me think about like, if you're listening to this and thinking like, wow, I have a lot of work to do, or like I'm very disconnected from my sacral, or I feel like there's a lot of trauma there, a lot of wounding there, I would say, first of all, of course, in the world in which we live, like we live in the patriarchy, right?
Yeah.
So that's number one. Number two, so many women have experienced, sexual violence, domestic violence, all of these things that impact the sacral chakra as well.
Yeah.
And finally, one of the things that came to mind is that the womb carries the memory,
Yeah.
right? So it's like, basically, the way in which women are able to self-actualize and regain sovereignty and claim their independence and their seat at the table in today's day and age is radical in comparison with basically the entire, stretch of history up until this
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
have, millennia,
Yeah.
millennia of women having no choice, not getting to say yes, please, and no, thank you, right?
Right.
Having to disconnect from their sacral, right?
Right.
Their sacral was a machine to be used. It
Yeah.
was not something for them to own for themselves, right?
Right.
And so it goes so deep and there's a lot of work to be done there and it's
Yes.
not easy,
Right.
but it's very rewarding, right? Of all of the centers to work with, this is probably the most fun one to
Yeah.
play around with. And
Yeah.
I feel like that's maybe a good segue into talking about some of the daily practices that we've jotted down to kind of
Absolutely.
ignite the sacral. Kind of touched on this earlier about how, women who are very much in their sacral, you can see that they're loose in their hips. They're able to move their body and be flexible. So dance, right? Quite literally dance.
Yep.
Personal example of this, I started taking pole classes a few months ago, and it has been the most healing and incredibly fun new adventure. I'm obsessed. Like it's so
And
amazing.
you're getting very good at it. I'm like, damn, she did like 5 spins on that.
Thank you, thank you.
Yeah. No, I love that for you. That's amazing. Movement
Yeah.
totally in general. I find anytime I'm exercising, I get so creative. Like my downloads aren't crazy
Hmm.
insane. And I'm always,
Yeah.
messy at the gym and I'm like, oh, whatever, I'll go on camera anyway. But I'm a
No
big,
shame.
right? No shame. I'm a big proponent of, if everyone listens to my singing and my dogs on my Instagram lately, I have no shame.
Yeah. I was
Um,
honestly impressed, Michaela. I was like, she could be opera trained.
so funny. But I love movement. I love movement
Mhm.
as we totally align with that. Just getting that stimulation going, heating up that sacral energy as well, heating up the body,
Mhm.
getting out of that cerebral kind of mind, that left brain, and
Yep.
moving without having much to think about it, just kind of feeling into something definitely activates the right side of the brain, will activate any of that sacral energy.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then, some ways to incorporate this and just like small additions to your daily routine. Definitely going to be, I always say, people who have a blockage in their sacral chakra, I notice they're constantly dehydrated. They don't
Oh,
drink enough water, or you'll hear people say, but when people tell me, I hate the taste of water, I don't like water, I'm always like, what's going on with your sacral,
yeah.
right? Like, hydrate yourself,
Yeah.
queen. Stay
Yeah.
hydrated.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Take those baths, take those showers, drink your water, drink your tea. The
Hmm.
incorporation of shades of gold and orange absolutely
Hmm.
um, helps to ignite that flame. Keeping flowers around. I love to keep flowers on my bedside table. So
Hmm.
it's the first thing I see in the morning.
Hmm.
And also, like you said, movement, right?
Yeah.
Like actually making sure that you're prioritizing movement every day, and particularly anything that's hip opening,
Yeah.
right? So, and anybody knows, like in any yoga class, the one pose that people are always dreading is like frog pose, right? Frog pose, straddle, any of those deep hip openers.
Yeah.
They're a lot, right? And,
Yeah.
as yoga teachers, we get trained on the fact that people will typically have a very strong emotional response to them
Yeah.
as well. Again, it's like anything that activates that sacral chakra,
Yeah.
you can be assured that there's probably going to be some emotional response, maybe even tears, right?
Yeah.
Probably tears.
Oh, absolutely. Because I weight train heavy. So
Hmm.
whenever I'm doing hip thrusts, so if you are a bodybuilder or weight trainer or just incorporating that and you do want to move some energy and you're not afraid, you put some extra weight on that barbell and some hip thrusts, and I have cried many times at that machine. Like, no shame. And for some reason, I get more energy from that
Hmm.
and I pack on more weight,
Hmm.
Yeah. I love
Yep.
to also say packing on jewelry. I think wearing your golds, your silvers, mix your metals. It's Aphrodite loved her jewelry. It's
Hmm.
a way to evoke the sacral energy, the glamour-esque of it, or just the richness of it, essentially, and the
Yep.
glamour. And these things can just kind of activate your creativity channel and how you feel about yourself, how you feel, how you look, if you have like a favorite sparkly bracelet or what have you.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Just adorning yourself, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's very much like, it's kind of a buzzword now, like that goddess energy or like treating yourself like a goddess. But it's true. Goddesses were bathed in oils and they took baths with herbs and rose petals and they ate sensual fruits and they wore perfume and they had their hair oiled and they wore jewelry and fine textiles. And it's like all of those things are just again, it's an act of devotion to yourself, right? And
Yeah.
I also think of the sacral very much in connection with devotion, but devotion to yourself and also how you're able to receive devotion from other people, right? It's
Yeah.
very much like the lover archetype that we were
Yeah.
talking about earlier. Do you know what I mean? Um,
Absolutely.
Something that also comes to mind is breath work, and in particular, deep belly breathing. If you find that you are a chest breather, that you are always just up here breathing in your chest, I can bet money on the fact that you have some stuff going on in your sacral because when the sacral is open, you are able to take those full deep belly breaths and expand through there.
Yeah.
And people, I find a lot of women in particular, sometimes even deal with like a very tight pelvic floor,
Yeah.
right? Because they're not breathing into their lower belly. They're
Yeah.
only breathing up here in the chest.
Yeah.
So, womb breathing, lower belly breathing can be very, very healing.
Yeah. It takes them out of the mind so
Hmm.
much and into the groundedness of the lower three chakras.
Yep.
And yeah, one of the last things we were talking about before we came on was tracking the moon's cycle to your natural rhythm. Now, you can do this like various ways. You can track it to your own personal cycle, which would just be in the natural rhythm of what's appropriate for you. But then also you can curate your creativity or your sensuality or your rituals to the cycles of the new moon, the half moon, the full moon
Mhm.
and just kind of embodying that because the moon does affect your emotions. If you have not tracked it before, it is very enlightening. Just give it a try for a month. You'll notice how your emotions they ebb and the flow and how your reactions are in accordance to where the moon is actually placed in the sky that day.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that, especially for women, lunar living
Yeah.
should be the gold standard,
Yeah.
right? It's really, like you said, a profoundly enlightening experience to see just how much she impacts us, right? And the moon is going to be the principle of where our heart is on a day-to-day basis, right? Where we are able to reflect our energy outward in any given day. And so tracking where she's moving through your chart is a really beautiful way of seeing, okay, this is where naturally my heart is going to be inclined this day. And so it's a great opportunity to use this as a time to materialize in this sector of life or to focus in this area of life. Do you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
for example, having the moon in the first house, great time during the month to go do all of your maintenance routines, right? Get your brows done, get your lashes done, get your hair done, all that type of stuff. Moon in the second house, a great time to pour into your food, your diet, your things, your possessions, to care for those. Also to look into your bank account or look into the things that are making you money, the things that you would like to make you money, all of those things, just so on and so forth, all
Yeah.
throughout the houses of your chart can be a really amazing way to give your life a little bit of witchy structure.
Yeah. So we do have I picked one. One of our subscribers, they reached out for some insight into what's going on in their life. So we're just gonna call this chart A. Lady A.
Chart X, yeah.
Lady A, we'll call
Ma-
her.
Madame X.
Yes. So I'll just pull this up really quick for us. She wants to know what do the transits have in store for her right now? Mm,
Yeah, I mean, I think personally, the thing that stands out to me immediately is obviously going to be Uranus right on her Mars, right? Especially as a Virgo rising, looking at what's going on, with her eighth house. Knowing that Uranus right now is conjunct the ruler of your eighth house, this just feels like a time of many sudden thresholds, right?
yeah.
Having to cross many bridges that suddenly appear out of nowhere. And these bridges, the eighth house is the house of thresholds in the sense that once you cross that bridge, it oftentimes feels like there's no going back,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, Definitely is kind of giving this quality of potentially rug being ripped out from underneath you a
Yeah.
little bit. But, I watched a video that you did, Makayla, the other day about Uranus that I absolutely loved. And I think you are so right on the money when you say that Uranus transits are always asking you the question, where do I need to be liberated? Right. And if I feel like I need to be liberated, am I able to compromise on that? And if I am, what needs to be rewritten and redefined about how I'm relating to this part of my life in order to stay here? And if I can't compromise, I need to leave.
Yeah.
Or oftentimes with Uranus, I might be forced to leave,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Forced to change and walk away.
Yeah.
Um, And with Mars, I oftentimes find that it's a lot of sudden decision making, whether you are on the receiving end of somebody else's sudden decision making or you yourself are making sudden decisions. They oftentimes, it's a time of people are kind of shocked at, what you're doing with your life and how other people are impacting your life, particularly with it in the 10th house. A lot of people are going to say that this could come through directly in a professional sense. But any angular house has the potential to impact all of the other four angular houses. So it can be relationships, it can be home, it can be profession, it can be your identity and your path in life. 10th house can sometimes, for me personally, I find it can also be mom sometimes, and also can talk about just your general relationship with status, right? What you want out of life and who you want to be seen as.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It would be normal for her if she was feeling irritated where she is right now or feeling
Mhm.
stuck, because I find that these Uranus transits do want you to liberate yourself, and you constantly have to ask that question like, am I free? Am I really free? And with this being the 10th house, this is definitely with your career and your direction and how you're seen in the world and your status. So there is that shift. It's undeniable that will be moved. And if you feel, could be one of two ways, right? You could feel irritated because there's no movement happening. But if you're consciously working to make choices and decisions, which is going to be stimulated by that Mars, to explore a different avenue where you might feel like you want to throw off old responsibilities, that
Mhm.
could be very likely too with this impacting her 10th house cusp. I would encourage that. I would encourage you to kind of open up and see what other avenues are. I do know that she might have a change in location, and that is very much signified by it being Gemini in her 10th house.
Yep.
So when you do have a transit to your 10th house for the specific person talking to her, you most likely will be changing your local environment.
Mhm.
And also to know that you, as right now in your chart is being impacted, you have a Uranus square to the nodes. And
Mhm.
the nodes are still in this Virgo Pisces axis. Very big past year and a half dynamic that you must have been going through, where there are massive endings and massive beginnings when it comes to you and the partnerships that you have, work
Mhm.
relationships, best friends, close partners, like relationship dynamics, like personal relationships, major endings and beginnings. And because this is the North Node in Pisces, usually the North Node I find brings hunger, it brings gain, it brings something new coming in. But given this is Pisces in general, it is that archetype of closing out happening. And so it's been an invitation for you to kind of end cycles when it comes to your relationships, your partnerships, and even the people that you work with, because that can fall under, or your clients can fall under your seventh house,
Mhm.
to close cycles out or to end cycles out. And that, I don't like to say this to bring fear or sadness if this isn't happening yet, but it also can just mean the meaning of those relationships are shifting and evolving to mean something else. And this process of letting people off the hook with the North Node in Pisces, seventh house, letting people off the hook, forgiveness, right? That will help open up that transition as well, because those nodes are going to continue to move towards Aquarius. And the closer that they move towards Aquarius means the closer they're forming that exact square to her Mars at the 10th house.
Yep.
So I wouldn't be surprised over the next couple of months as this hones in, it just becomes a bit more of a trigger of things that can be a little painful to close out or chapters to close
Yep.
out. Again, there's this erosion happening, but at the same time, there's a newness beginning, and all of this new energy has been activating her eighth house, which can mean that there's new money stories that come in, big money stories, because I tend to
Mhm.
big wealth can fall into the eighth house that
Yep.
require her to be brave and to take charge in a new way. Maybe she hasn't developed a trust in herself with before. They
Yep.
could seem risk taking. They could seem like a little bit outlandish at times, but I think Saturn is supportive here in the eighth house because it could mean there's a contract coming in or some kind of relationship for the long term, this story forming when it comes to, her money and her finances. But even on a deeper level, if a new relationship was to come in or the next level of a relationship was to evolve, there can be a depth of, security and stability there when it comes to sharing intimacy, not just in resources, but beyond resources as well.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I would definitely mirror all of that and say, for anybody listening, whenever you look at your own chart and your own transits, it's so important in astrology to make sure that there's multiple layers of confirmation, right? And so these stories of there being a potential ending and transition in general life trajectory, and particularly through career, are definitely mirrored by what's going on with that Saturn as well. I wouldn't be surprised to hear if she might be feeling a little cynical about her situation right now, maybe a little critical about the things that are happening. Saturn conjunct Mercury is definitely a transit that can bring a seriousness to the mind and a level of skepticism and criticism that can feel a little bit upsetting, especially depending on what's going on with your Mercury. And given that she has an Aries Mercury, right, I can tell that Saturn energy is probably not going to feel the most comfortable in her mind, right? It's not as inspired, I think, as an Aries Mercury would like to be, right?
Yeah,
But that being said, Mercury is the ruler of her 10th house and her midheaven. It is the ruler of her ascendant, right? And coming into this final, basically like new moon aspect, this conjunction, this applying conjunction of Saturn to her natal Mercury. If Saturn brings anything, he does bring endings, right? So, an ending to a career, a workplace, a professional trajectory, and as the ascendant ruler, an ending to a previous identity, right?
yeah,
And a rebirth that comes through that, which again, Saturn in the eighth house, definitely a time when we are rebuilding the foundations of our psyche, right? For sure, over the
yeah,
course of the next 2 years. And oftentimes that is instigated by, upset and loss. But at the end of the day, like you said earlier, with so much Uranus activation, I always tell clients when they're going through a lot of Uranus stuff, when you think to yourself, this has never worked for me before, or I've never done this, so I don't know why it would work for me now, do it
yeah,
because Uranus is out of all of the planets, one of the most risk-taking, right? He's not risk averse at all, and he rewards people who are willing to take those risks. He's very much the fool archetype, right? Kind of like jump and grow your wings on the way down. So I think you're right to encourage that.
yeah, yeah. And I align with all of that. And like on the backdrop, as there's a lot of change for sure going
I
on.
know.
So I'm like I'm glad that she reached out and asked this question because, you know, on the backdrop, I see this Pluto that has just entered her sixth house too, which is, a house of our vocation and what we do on a daily level. I'm pretty sure she has a position of power or has had positions of power in her career. I had a
Mm,
short conversation with her at one point. And she was kind of high level and high up there. And I think she worked like with international companies which is kind of
okay.
very significant of her ninth and her 12th house with the sun in the ninth and the moon and
Yeah.
it's like so on brand.
Hmm.
But Pluto here entering your sixth house, there was going to be a transformation anyway on what your entire daily life situation looked like, regardless, right? So it's a powerful move because Pluto wants to bring you power here, and it's forming a trine to that Uranus in the 10th house. So it is so supportive for that liberation and that power to come in. It doesn't
Absolutely.
mean that the transition would be easy, essentially, right? But there is this element of freedom within both of these two archetypes communicating with each other that some kind of evolution and change that you're embracing or going to be able to embrace right now is going to give you a lot more freedom on your daily routine.
Yeah.
And as a Virgo rising, um, with a layering here with the sixth house often being important, at least for the EA lens, you need to work on your daily habits and routines and what that cleanliness looks like for you. It's very important to keep your mind, body, and soul in alignment, you know. As a Virgo rising, a part of your journey here is learning of like your own health and wellness and what that kind of looks like for you and writing your own narrative.
Yep.
And Pluto now ruling your sixth house and entering your sixth house and kind of being like, hey, like, what kind of power do I want to have in my daily life, in my daily routine? Maybe, you are offloading so much responsibility now that you don't need to carry anymore.
Mhm.
And it's really giving you more power and more structure, more control in how you can embody your health and your routine. And I would also amplify, I guess, that as being a 12th house moon, there's like an extra importance of nurturing her body, her emotional body,
Mhm.
where there's a lot more peace. There can be more peace in her daily life. So if you were in a position where relationship or work was stressful up until this point, I would say life transitions are saying
Yeah.
it's time to clear that out.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. And especially with Saturn on her ascendant ruler right now, it's not uncommon when going through that transit to meet a hard wall where
Yeah.
we realize the ways that we've been neglecting just quite literally our physical health and vitality. Saturn is the principle of decrease, right?
Yeah.
So I wouldn't be surprised, like you said, if there's been a decrease or a needed decrease in responsibility, visibility, and power in the workplace,
Yeah.
and also potentially a decrease in vitality, energy, and just general upkeep of the body at this time, maybe due to stress, right? Saturn is definitely like a stress fracture kind of planet.
Yeah.
And one of the final things I wanted to mention is that
Mm.
in the background of this, you're going through your Pluto square, right? Pluto is retrograding right now and moving back to
Ah,
square your Pluto.
yeah.
And, if anything, I always tell people Pluto transits always feel like you are the poor little caterpillar in the chrysalis, right? And people often forget that the caterpillar actually dissolves into this amorphous mush before it actually rebuilds itself into a butterfly. It's
Yeah.
kind of um, it's not a pretty process. And so, having some empathy and compassion for yourself that you're moving through this, right? And that energy might feel a little bit more peripheral because you have Pluto in the third and Pluto in the sixth transiting right now. But either way, it's transformational, and it's also,
Yeah.
this is very much all the transits she's going through right now very much feel like liberation through facing one's shadow or being forced to face one's fears, right? But I do think that once Venus moves into Cancer, and we have that nice conjunction with Jupiter later on in June,
Yeah.
it's going to be a really nice time to revitalize your aspirations, your relationship with what you aspire to obtain in life,
Yeah.
and some of the things that you need in order to support your journey towards reaching your full expression.
I love that. And I guess I'll just wrap this up because when you were
Yeah.
talking, I noticed too. Uh, she has Lilith conjunct her North Node in
Yeah.
Taurus. So if you listen back to the Lilith archetype, it's very important that you own that and you claim that when it
Yeah.
comes to your time, your body, your resources, right?
Yep.
So very much a strong Lilith signature here.
Claim that sacral.
Yeah. So, and it's square your moon. So pay attention to the
hmm
Lilith. Yeah. Awesome.
Cool.
Yeah, I
All
hope that
right,
was
we did it.
helpful. Yeah. That's it. It's episode number one.
All right. Thank you, everybody, so much for joining us. Like we mentioned earlier, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more. All of our socials will be linked below so that you can keep up with everything that Makayla and I are doing personally and collaboratively. And here's to more episodes, even bigger and better than this one.
Yeah. Thank you.